He went to Newark High School where he met his wife, and he also went to Brown University and finished, and now he came back and he leads us. I'd like to introduce the governor of our state, Jack Markell.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. As always, great to be with you at Wilmington Rotary. I want to thank Carla for joining us today. This is as close to a date as we get. I also want to acknowledge Senator Margaret Rose Henry, who is sitting over here. I'm pleased, a wonderful advocate. I'm not sure if there are other, Senator Greg Lavelle is here. There may be Hanifa Shabazz is here. I know that Namdi was here. There may be other legislators. If I don't see you, I apologize. Our Secretary of Labor, John McMahon, is here as well. Senator Brian Townsend is here. All right. We had an amazing morning with Secretary Duncan over at Howard, and I will let him talk a little bit more about that. It was inspiring. The first time that Secretary Duncan came to Delaware, and he has been here a lot. He's been here at least 5, maybe 6 times. And the first time he came, we also went to Howard, at a time when Howard was struggling a bit. And he, went in, and everywhere he goes to learn. We met with teachers, we met with kids. We have the superintendent of the Newcastle County Votech School District and the principal of Howard, Stan Spohr, who are here today. But to be at Howard today and to see the progress that that school has made is extraordinary. And to listen to the teachers at Howard tell their story and talk about the culture in the school and to talk about a bunch of other things that have led to the amazing, amazing gains at that school was, in fact, inspiring. And I mention that as my way of introducing the Secretary, because I think it is really important for us to step back often. Education has become, across the country and certainly here in Delaware, a very hot topic. And it should be a hot topic because it's so important to our country's future. But sometimes all of in that heat, there is vitriol, there is a lot that flies around. And too often, all that flies around, we lose sight of the kids for whom this is all about. And I think it's really important, and it should not take a visit by the U.S. Secretary of Education for us to really focus in on the enormous gains and the fact that, as we announced earlier this week, we have seen an all-time high in high school graduations and an all-time low in dropouts. I mean, real things to there are amazing things going on. And that being said, and we heard today from a number of teachers at Howard, one of them a young man who is a native of Wilmington, really an incredible guy. He went to the University of Virginia. He had opportunities to do all sorts of things all over the country and beyond. A guy named Garrett Lyons, young guy. And one of the things he said today, he talked about the progress at Howard, and they were talking about the culture. And he said, Howard, the motto of Howard is around continuous improvement. And from the words of Garrett Lyons, who I think is probably still in his 20s, I'm guessing, Stan? He's 25? Continuous improvement, it works for Howard, it works for all schools in Delaware, and it works for us as a state. And so long as we keep the focus where the focus ought to be, on getting better every single day, on celebrating our victories, but in making sure that when we fall short, we understand why and we aim to get better the next day, that's what we need to do. And we have been so fortunate to have in Washington, D.C., a U.S. Secretary of Education who has been such a passionate advocate and leader for kids. And he's been willing to knock a few heads together. And he's been willing to make a few people mad across the country. But he does it with a purpose, which is he knows that when we all focus on helping the kids and not fighting with each other, we're going to make extraordinary progress. And so it is a great honor for me to introduce, on at least his 5th visit to Delaware as the U.S. Secretary of Education, somebody that I can tell you, my fellow governors, Republicans as well as Democrats, believe is one of the finest secretaries we've ever had in this country across any departments. And here he is in Delaware at Wilmington Rotary, Arne Duncan.
Thank you so much, Governor. And I didn't realize I was the first cabinet secretary in 100 years, so I feel the pressure. If I do a bad job, I'll be the last one for the next 100 years. Get lifted up. Is it going up? Is that better? Keep going, keep going. All right. And my staff wrote me a fantastic speech that unfortunately I'm not going to read. And the visit this morning to Howard really moved me, and I just want to sort of talk about what I saw there, talk about what I'm seeing across the nation, across the states, and then open up to any questions you might have. Before I begin, I'd like the team from Howard to please stand up. The students, the staff, the fantastic principal, please stand. And I just want to begin where the governor ended, that we can debate politics, we can debate ideology, but at the end of the day, the only thing that I think matters is giving our children a chance to be successful in life. And when the Vice President and I visited Howard 4 years ago, it was not going there, frankly, to say what an amazing job you're doing. We went there to challenge the status quo. And we had some hope. But for me, the test is always, would I send my own child to a school? And we do lots of schools. We have lots of schools around the nation that somehow are good enough for someone else's children, but not good enough for your own. And this work has to be very, very personal. And what we've seen from Howard over the past 4 or 5 years is an amazing principal and a set of teachers who are committed to giving every single young person there a chance to have a successful future. And it is a labor of love. It is not a job. It is a passion. This is mission-driven work. One of the things we heard from a teacher today is he said he wants to be a hero to his students. That's what his job description is. He wants to become a hero. And what they're doing through hard work, and I'm sure plenty of mistakes and missteps and internal debates, is they're creating an opportunity structure for young people where that simply didn't exist before. And you can look at the graduation rate increases and reductions in dropout rates and test scores that have improved remarkably. And it's not mission accomplished yet. They have a long way to go. But they've done it in a thoughtful, in a disciplined, in a systemic way. Had a huge focus on AP classes and dual enrollment, and starting to give young people a chance as a junior to take college-level classes. And the benefits aren't just getting that class. It's huge financial savings, but the mentality, the psychology for students who are maybe first-generation college goers to say, I really can belong in a situation like that. I can be successful. That has a profound impact on their mentality. They've done a tremendous amount of work around career and technical education. In education, we fight so many debates that I think are silly, so many false debates. It's always this fight, college versus careers. It's never college versus careers. It's always both and. And the fact is, as a nation, we don't have enough young people who are truly prepared for college, and we don't have enough who are prepared for the world of work. And what the Howard team is doing is preparing young people for both, and guess what? Letting them choose what's the right fit for them, where they want to go. Technology, every student has an iPad. New world of opportunity going forward. I don't know why we keep buying books, spending $8 billion a year on books. They're obsolete the day we get them. So starting to meet the students where they are. Huge focus on after school and extracurriculars and clubs and teams and those kinds of things to give high school students a reason to be excited to come to school on a freezing February day like this, whether it's here in Delaware or back home for me in Chicago. Huge focus on culture building and continuous improvement that the governor talked about. The staff there, you could just feel, you can listen to the words, but you can feel in the room how much they support each other and how much they have each other's back and how much they're trying to get better every day and learn from one another. The governor pointed out at the end of the conversation, it's a school that happens to be 85% minority, that happens to have a pretty high poverty rate, and an hour-long conversation never got mentioned once. Not that it doesn't present some real challenges, not that there are not some real obstacles we have to overcome, But no one was saying, because our children may not be the wealthiest, may not have been born with a silver spoon in life, they can't be successful. The whole conversation was, how do we help these kids do well? And so that story over the past 4 or 5 years, and I said earlier, I rarely get to visit the same school twice in this country. I've been to 50 states, been to hundreds and hundreds of schools. There are 100,000 schools, though. So it's not often I get to go back and to see the progress, to see the momentum, to see where that school, how far it's come, but also how far it can go. For me, it was just like a perfect metaphor for where this state is going and ultimately where I hope this country is going. So let's give another round of applause for our team at Howard and what they're doing. This is sort of take from one school to look at the state here. And I'm a big fan of the governor, have been from the first time I met him, and he also went to the University of Chicago, and I'm a little biased. I grew up there. My dad taught there for over 40 years. But the progress the state has made over the past 4, 5, 6 years is, I think, remarkable. And again, long way to go. No one's satisfied. But you look at the focus on early childhood education. And I say everywhere I go, that is the best investment as a nation we can make. If we're going to spend a single tax dollar on education, if we had $1 to spend, I would spend it on early childhood education. We have so many children in this country who start kindergarten at 5 years old, a year to 16 months behind. And frankly, we don't do a fantastic job of catching them up. And ultimately, we have to get out of the catch-up business. We have to make sure our babies enter kindergarten academically and socially ready to be successful. You guys have done some things that are extraordinarily astute. Not only are you increasing access, which is great, but you've focused on quality. You've created incentives for your highest performing early childhood programs to take more low-income students. We heard about that earlier in the introduction, how important that is. You put in place incentives for low-performing early childhood programs to improve their quality. And over time, those results won't be seen for 10, 12, 15 years, sometimes for 20 years. Over time, that's the best investment that we as a nation can make. James Heckman, a University of Chicago professor, Nobel Prize-winning economist, a 7-to-1 ROI. For every dollar we put in, we get back $7. Less teenage pregnancy, less dropouts, less violence, more folks going on to college, more folks going into the world of work, more becoming productive citizens. And of all the scarce tax dollars we all spend, how many are we getting back as a nation? $7 for every single one. Not in too many other places. On the K-12 side, the governor said, we didn't plan it this way, we scheduled this months ago, but it's seen in the paper the past couple of days. High school graduation rates at all-time highs, dropout rates at 30-year lows, AP passing rates at all-time highs. That's extraordinary progress. Not where it needs to be, long way to go. We're proud the nation is up about 1% in high school graduation rates. You guys went up 4%, 5% in the past year. That's a huge jump. That's a huge jump. And for me, while that is great, we know here in this room that a high school diploma today is no longer enough. It's a great starting point, but it's got to be one step on the education journey. Some form of higher education has to be the goal beyond that. And you guys have done something that I'm convinced is unprecedented and that other states have to learn from. You have this fundamental commitment that every senior, regardless of how much money their family has or doesn't have, where they live, every senior who is college ready will apply to college and will be accepted. No other state has made that commitment. And we know if you leave high school today and don't take that next step, not too many good jobs out there. I don't have to tell this audience that. You guys fundamentally get that. So what you guys have done, early childhood, K-12, focus on higher ed, there's just a holistic, comprehensive strategy that I think you guys should be so proud of. And if you guys can continue to get better the next 3, 4, 5 years, think about what that means. And I think the implications, not just for the children at Howard and children around the state, but the implications for the nation are extraordinary. Think of it as a nation, we can start to provide high-quality early childhood for every single child. Think of a nation if we can take high school graduation rates to an entirely different level and continue to drive down those dropout rates. Think if every single one of our seniors goes to some form of higher education. Doesn't matter, what's their choice? 4-year universities, 2-year community colleges, trade, technical, vocational training. There's no right or wrong answer there. The only wrong answer is no more education beyond that. And so what you guys are doing here, I want this community to understand, is fantastic for your young people, but the nation has a chance to learn from you, and we have to learn from you. Why are all these changes so important? Lots of debate. Debate is good. Why are we pushing people, encouraging people, challenging people to raise standards and think differently about assessments and be much more comprehensive in our efforts? It's because the world has changed. When I grew up in the south side of Chicago, not that long ago, I'm getting older, But it wasn't the end of the world, but if my friends dropped out of high school, they could get a decent job. We had stockyards, we had steel mills. They could pay their mortgage and have a home and support a family and do okay. And again, this room knows better than most that those jobs are gone and they are never coming back. We're at a globally competitive economy. And if our children aren't prepared, the divide between the haves and the have-nots is just going to become exacerbated. The jobs will move from Delaware, from the United States to other nations who take their education much more seriously. And so just as Howard was at a fork in the roads 4 or 5 years ago, I think the state of Delaware and the United States, our nation, is at a fork in the roads today. And we can either give in to the noise and give in to the pushback and sort of slow down, or we can push through that and stay the course and go to the next level. As I said earlier, the nation now has the highest graduation rates ever, lowest dropout rates ever. Over the past 5 years or so, we have an additional 1.1 million students of color, not just graduating from high school, but going on to college. So things are going the right way. But there's a big push to slow down, to stop, that this is hard. The bar is too high, the change is too hard. If Howard wouldn't have made those changes, it would have been a much easier time for them. But what would have been the implications for the young people that we're supposed to be serving? How many fewer would be graduating from high school? How many fewer would be first generation going on to college? And so the choices that we make through the noise, through the rhetoric, we should have the debate, we should have the discussion, because the governor said, what's the right thing to do for kids? They have one chance to get a great education, and we all have to work together to do that. As we fight to give our children a chance, this is a civil rights fight. We're fighting for our nation's economy. The implications for all of us are huge. We cannot continue to have huge segments of our population with no chance of entering the middle class, with no chance of having a high-wage, high-skilled job. That economic divide, that social divide, often that racial divide, is untenable. The only way to increase social mobility, the only way to stop having the haves and the have-nots, is to give every single child a world-class education. We want to continue to be a good partner. Washington will never solve the world's education problems. The hard work is always being done by great teachers and great principals and parents and students themselves. So right now there's a debate going on in Washington about fixing No Child Left Behind. And believe me, that law needs to be fixed. It is broken, it is out of date. We could spend the next hour discussing all the faults there. The goal for me is not to replace the law, it's to replace the law with something better. And unfortunately, what we're seeing today coming from a Republican-controlled House and a Republican-controlled Senate is not, I think, taking us where we need to go. There's no mention of early childhood education. I think this idea of education starting at 5 years old at kindergarten is too late. It's too late. It's got to start with preschool. Again, it's the best investment we can make. There is no focus on innovation. And we have to keep getting better, and we have to share best practices and scale what's working in local communities. That's what we should be doing. The bills that we're seeing so far would actually permit money to go from poorer districts and move those scarce resources to wealthier districts. I don't know what problem that is trying to solve. I know it will create huge, huge challenges there. We want to invest more in education. We want to have increased accountability. We want to hold ourselves responsible for making sure that students do have a chance at getting a good education. We want to challenge the status quo when things aren't working. And so it is not too late. We desperately want folks in Congress to work in a bipartisan way, not just to have a new law, but to have a law that the president can be proud to support and continue to move the country in the right direction. So these debates that you guys are having, these legitimate conversations and fights, have them, but keep the focus where it needs to be. And change is hard. Change is always difficult. It is never easy. There'll be bumps in the road. There'll be mistakes. So you guys raise standards. That's really hard to do. Next generation of assessments coming this year. Really hard to do. But guess what? For the first time, you're measuring critical thinking skills. Most of you guys are employers. It's probably pretty important to you. First time, we'll be evaluating students' writing. That's pretty important. First time we're moving away from filling the bubble test. That's pretty important. Challenging ourselves to do better, to evolve. We have to do that. The final thing I'll say and open up to any questions is this idea of education, public education being a K-12 journey that may have worked well for the past 100 years. That doesn't work going forward. We have to start with early childhood education, and we have to focus at least through grade 14, through community college, if not beyond. And what's worked in the past, we just can't be wedded to what has always happened. We can't be wedded to classrooms of students sitting in rows and everyone learning the same thing at the same time. Education evolves far too slowly. And we need all of you to challenge the status quo, to push for change. Students should be able to learn anything they want, anytime, anywhere. That's where technology is so important. Our children need and deserve to have access to the best teachers, the hardest working principals like Principal Spoor, who have stayed the course there. They need to have the highest of expectations. The chance to go to college regardless of their socioeconomic status, that should be a right, not a chance, not something that stops them from moving forward. And so we need to fight the fights, fight the battles, but have the end goal, have that North Star in mind. And I think too often these debates, those things get lost. But if you think about if we do the right thing over the next couple of years, if we can invest in early childhood education, if we can increase access to higher education, if we can put more money, more resources to support great teachers and hardworking principals, if we can support innovation, if we can work in a bipartisan way, education has to be the ultimate bipartisan issue, then these next couple, 4 or 5 years could be extraordinary. If we don't do that, if we take a step backwards, the cost, not to any of us in this room, except for our young people here, most of us in this room were lucky enough to get a great education, but the cost to our young people and ultimately to our nation is pretty staggering. We don't need to pay that cost. We should keep moving forward, we should work together, we should challenge each other, and if we do that, the benefits for our children, our families, our communities, our state, and ultimately the nation are pretty extraordinary. Thank you so much. Thank you for the hard work you're doing. Happy to take any questions you might have.
We have 2 sergeants at arms. Kate is on this side. We have another microphone on this side. Patty has on this side. If you'll raise your hand, they'll bring the microphone to you. Please state your name so that we know who you are. And I believe that the Secretary also would invite the Governor up if you have questions for him as well. Okay, David?
David Rhodes. You said that we had the best graduation rate ever, best dropout rate ever. What, in fact, were those numbers?
So on the graduation rate, we just announced a week and a half ago, we're up to 81% as a nation. I think Delaware is at 85? 85, so again, Delaware is ahead of where we are. Dropout rates have gone down. I usually disaggregate the data. So our Hispanic dropout rate has been cut in half over the past decade, from about 28% to 14%, and African American dropout rate has been cut by about 45%. Having said that, our dropout rates are still way too high, and our graduation rate is not where it needs to be. And to state the obvious, if any of our young people are dropping out today, there are no good jobs, none, in the legal economy. So for me, this goes way beyond education. It's about, are we perpetuating poverty and social failure, or are we providing a ladder of opportunity for students out of poverty and into the middle class?
My name is Matt Kinservik, and I have a question for you about charter schools. My kids are fortunate to attend an excellent charter school, very innovative, demonstrable results. My concern is that although charters are meant to be models for the district schools, there's not necessarily that full loop being closed. Are there good national models where there is this exchange of information and innovation?
There are some good models, there are not enough. And to be very clear, I'm a big fan of high-performing charters. I'm not a fan of low-performing charters. I'm a big fan of high-performing traditional schools. I'm not a fan of low-performing traditional schools. And to be very clear, charters don't have the monopoly on innovation, good ideas. That flow of information, of knowledge, of best practices has to go back both ways. And again, it's one of these false debates that, again, drives me crazy. It's like college versus careers, charters versus traditional. We just need every school in this nation to be a great school. We need every child to have access to a great education. There's one common goal, and that's academic success, and one common enemy, and that's academic failure. And so whether it's a traditional school, it's been open for 150 years, whether it's a brand new school or charter, whoever can help lead more students in the right direction, we should learn from and replicate and share. In schools where that's not happening, we need to challenge that status quo with a real sense of urgency that, frankly, too many places we've been too passive, too slow to move. Yeah.
Let me add something to that, and I actually think it's a very important question, but let me give you a real-world example here in Delaware. A number of the charter schools have adopted a different type of teacher evaluation process than some of the traditional schools. And Eastside Charter being one, I think Coomba is another one. In many schools, the at least in some schools in Delaware, principals can't actually go into a classroom to do a teacher evaluation unless that observation has been announced in advance, and which makes it difficult for principals to be real instructional leaders. It's not true in every school, but it is true in some. And I think to some extent, too often teachers look at those visits by principals as perhaps punitive, because the way the whole teacher evaluation process has developed over time, there is a punitive, it feels to teachers like there's a punitive element to it. But that being said, some of our charter schools basically went to the Department of Education, as any district can, and said, we'd like to try a different approach. And so in some of these schools, the principals are making very frequent, like once a week, once every couple weeks, visits to the classrooms. Their visits may be brief. They're seen much more as value added and supportive as opposed to punitive. And it's certainly the teachers that I have talked to in those schools feel a whole lot better about the evaluation process. And I think it would not surprise me if we see, more traditional schools look at that model. I think people are generally not very satisfied with the traditional teacher evaluation process, and they might adopt more of that in some of the traditional schools. At least that's my hope.
Thank you. Pete.
The very, very quick thing I'd add, that one of the most interesting innovations I see coming from the highly successful charter schools isn't so much some fancy curricular idea, it's just more time. It's longer days, longer weeks, summers, and when students are behind, you have to work a little harder. And thinking very differently about time, not as a constant, but as a variable that can be used to benefit students. Many high-performing charters are thinking about that in a pretty profound way. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Secretary Duncan, I couldn't agree more with your focus on the need for early childhood education, because we have to get them at the beginning. But I'm interested in your thoughts on how that can be integrated into the larger 365-day-a-year early childhood development process. And Governor, I think it would be really important for you maybe to comment on some of the things we're doing here in Delaware to try to achieve that.
Well, I'm very excited about the enormous progress that we've made over the last few years in early childhood education with the support of the members of the General Assembly. And I want to be very clear, it would not have been possible without them. The key thing that we did is recognize what it takes for these efforts to be sustainable. And so we had to look at the fact that throwing more money at the problem alone was not going to be sufficient. And what we had to do was focus on quality. And we have the benefit in Delaware of having a very solid foundation to build on. It's called our STARS rating system, where early childhood centers know exactly what they have to do across a whole variety of criteria. The preparation of the teachers, the kind of materials in the classroom, and others to reach 3 stars or 4 stars or 5 stars. And what we basically did is we said to centers, if you were able to achieve a 3-star rating, you're going to be reimbursed at 80% of the market rate. If you get to 4 stars, you get 90%. If you get to 5 stars, you get 100%. And what this meant is that for the first time ever, 5-star centers actually had an incentive to admit low-income children, because previously the reimbursement from low-income kids was not sufficiently high. And it also meant that for the first time ever, mediocre centers had an incentive to invest in quality because they knew that they were going to be able to make more money. And so as a result, over the last 3 years or so, we've more than doubled the number of low-income children who are enrolled in the best centers. And so that, we think, is a game changer for all the reasons that Secretary Duncan mentioned. But we've also not stopped there, because we've made sure that there is a continuum for the students coming out of our early childhood centers. When they get to school, every student, as of I think next year, either this year or next year, every incoming kindergarten student will spend about 45 minutes with their kindergarten teacher-to-be, where the kindergarten teachers have the time to really assess the kids. Now, what the kindergarten teachers tell us is that this has allowed them to forge much stronger relationships with the families than they ever had before, and also have a much stronger sense of what gifts that each child comes to school with.
I have nothing to add to that. Amen.
Question on Head Start. Where does Head Start fit into national early childhood education programs, both federally and for Jack statewide?
So just quickly, we've sort of focused on pre-K, and for me, it's really got to be 0 to 5, birth through 5. And the more we're doing early home visiting, we know the young children who are at risk. We know how many are being born to moms who are 13 and 14 and 15 and 16 and don't have all the supports. We know which homes don't have books. Whatever we can do early to reach them, we have to do that. And I've seen some fantastic early home visiting programs, both in inner city communities, but also in rural Kentucky and other places. So for me, that 0 to 3 home piece is very important. Head Start can continue to focus on 3-year-olds. We could do more pre-K as a nation, 4, and then go to kindergarten at 5. So it's got to be a seamless continuum of opportunity, birth through 5. I don't know if you want to say anything on this state.
Next question.
Excuse me, Margie Pruitt. Secretary Duncan, as if working on pre-K through high school isn't enough, is the Department of Education doing anything to work on the issues of education for the structurally unemployed? So people out of high school, out of college, whose jobs, like you said, are no longer available because those jobs are gone?
Yeah, so the whole push that the president has around free community college is exactly addressing that. And we're going to a community college after this. I've been to Delaware Tech, Del Tech. I've been to dozens and dozens of community colleges around the nation. And you know, Howard was amazing today. I have to tell you, my community college visits are just absolutely inspiring. And yes, you have 18-year-olds there, but you have 38-year-olds there, and you have 58-year-olds there. And you have people whose jobs have disappeared through no fault of their own. The industry is gone, and they're coming back to retrain and retool and get back on their feet. It's usually these melting pots, baby United Nations. It's unbelievable to see, but green energy and IT and healthcare and advanced manufacturing, high-performing community colleges are becoming regional economic engines. They are literally driving opportunity in their communities. And so that is, for me, exactly the place where folks who need to retool need to have the opportunity to come back and work on their skills.
Some of the most inspiring stories are the kind of people you're talking about. And so I've had many opportunities over the last few years to visit the Delaware Tech's New Innovation and Technology Center, where I meet people who are anywhere from 25 to, late 50s. Most of the folks that I've met have been employed, but most of them are underemployed, in their own words. Some of them are not working at all, but most of them are employed, raising a family, working a full-time job. And somehow they find the courage and they've got the tenacity to go, and they are studying Algebra 2. And when you ask them what is the most difficult thing about what they're doing, they generally will say Algebra 2. I mean, these are folks who have not studied math in 2 or 3 decades, but they know that there is something better at the end of that road. And so our job is to make sure that those resources are available to them, but we can only meet them halfway. What it really takes is their grit and their determination. And then it's up to us to make sure that we're bringing employers to the table so that the skills that they're learning actually have a market when they're finished.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer French. I'm the new development manager of the first dual language charter school here in Delaware, Las Americas Aspira Academy. And I absolutely 100% agree with everything, the 0 through 5, they're fundamental years, and it's actually been proven, especially in language. So my question is, now that this charter school has opened, I'm starting to see that other schools are starting to add a bilingual component. Is that going to be something nationwide that's starting?
Yeah, so again, and we always go back for me to how are we going to be internationally economically competitive? And the fact is most kids in Europe grow up bi or trilingual. And so our kids who grow up just knowing English are actually at a competitive disadvantage before the game even starts. And so I'm a huge fan of dual language. There are, again, many communities where you have Hispanic children learning English, no Spanish, and they're learning Mandarin. Just think about the world of opportunity they're going to have. So we put some resources behind. We'd love to do more. And again, as you know so well, the more we're doing that early. I started back in the day in 3rd grade. It's late then. And so what are we doing for our babies all the way up to help them learn 2 and sometimes even a 3rd language? And just the competitive advantage they'll be going forward is extraordinary.
Let me put a punctuation point on that. And again, with the help of the members of the General Assembly, today in Delaware, 1,400 kindergartners through 2nd graders are spending half of their school day learning in either Spanish or Chinese. That's in 11 schools. Next year, there will be 17 schools, and we're going to have 2,200, between 2,200 and 2,300 kindergartners through third graders. And so we think this is and here's why. I mean, last May, the ambassador from Spain came to Dover. The capital school district, Cesar Rodney School District was the first one to start a few years ago with the Chinese immersion program. They're adding Spanish, and the ambassador from Spain came to Delaware. He said Spanish companies have directly created 80,000 jobs in this country. But normally when they come to this country, they'll go to Florida, Texas, or California because that's where the Spanish speakers are. I want them to come here. And Utah has been the best state in the country in terms of bilingual education for a long time. We are quickly catching up, and I don't see any reason we can't be the most bilingual state if we keep with it.
Elizabeth Rhodes. For the past number of years, we've heard about an emphasis on STEM education, science, technology, English, and math. And if we add an A for the arts, we have STEAM, which is a very powerful energy force. And would you speak about how you view the role of the arts in education?
So what I try and say, and I left it out because I didn't do my written speech, I apologize, is that every kid deserves what I call a well-rounded, world-class education. So obviously arts are a huge piece of that. I would add to that PE. I would add to that financial literacy, which we saw today at Howard. I would add to that the foreign languages. And these things, again, should not be in competition. It's not STEM versus whatever. We need a lot more STEM, but we need a lot more arts. We need a lot more financial literacy. We need a lot more foreign languages. And these things can't be seen as extra. They can't be seen as just for the wealthy or the privileged in the private schools. And somehow this has to start to be the norm. And not just in high school, but in elementary and middle school. So a huge play for the arts. Obviously, so many children come to school. They may not love Algebra 2, but they want to be in the play, or be in the band, or perform in a concert, or whatever it might be. Robotics, debate, academic decathlon. All these things are not extras. They're just absolutely fundamental, and we have to start to have that mentality that every child deserves access to a well-rounded, world-class education. Yes, including the arts, but not in conflict of anything else.
Secretary Duncan, thank you for being with us today. I wanted to ask you a question about special needs education. So there's an incredibly rapidly rising number of kids with autism in our schools here in Delaware and around the country, and they have some pretty complex needs in the classroom. I'm wondering what you're seeing going on around the country in educating these kids.
Yeah, so let me take that one specifically and then sort of come back to a broader point around special education. So where there are very real needs and severe needs, how we meet that on an individual basis, how we really support students with a growing population. There's some fantastic work, and we can get you offline, people in places that we think are doing an amazing job, and there's obviously nothing more important we can do there. But let me sort of step back on the larger special ed world. Where there's very legitimate needs, we have to do everything we can to meet them. But I also fundamentally believe that many children are labeled special ed when they don't need to be. And it's disproportionately boys and boys of color. And we do it because we don't teach them to read. Some really interesting research coming out of North Carolina where students who have access to early learning, like at 30 or 40% less identification. And you guys probably know once someone is labeled special needs, it stays with them for life. No, that label never disappears. You never come out of special ed. Doesn't happen. And so when you think about we need to invest more, when you think about the billions and billions of dollars we spend while we stigmatize and label kids who don't deserve that, I would love to think about how we meet the very real needs where they are, but how we have a heck of a lot less kids who enter the special ed world in the first place, teaching them how to read, taking care of our boys. High quality early learning, again, is the best prevention we can put in there.
Secretary, thank you for joining us today. Governor, thank you for joining us today. I'm David Plaza. My question has to do with what messages or what support is the government in its effort in education to support the families behind these kids that are struggling. Can you speak to that?
I think it is a great question, incredibly important question, and if I had a magic wand to wave at education, I'd certainly wave it to increase the level of parental engagement. I think there are a lot of those decisions are generally better made at a local level because it's not one size fits all. And in fact, when we went through the Race to the Top application back in 2010, there was actually a component around family engagement. And that was one where we essentially said to each district, and we have a couple of our great superintendents here today, Vicki Garrett from Newcastle County Vo-Tech and Mark Holodick from Brandywine, we basically said to the local districts, you ought to come up with your plan to get families engaged, because those decisions are not going to best be made in Dover. And there have been a number of models around the state where schools try to incorporate a variety of services, whether it's job search, housing, other kinds of social services in the school to make it, to really give parents an extra reason to show up. I think some of those have probably worked better than others. But I think this is an ongoing challenge, and it's one of these things, if there are great models from around the country, we would certainly be very interested in hearing about them.
At the federal level, it's an area where I think, candidly, we didn't do enough, and I didn't do enough in the early years. I think there's huge unmet need there. One thing we're trying to work with Congress is to get more flexibility around Title I dollars, and we'd love to go from about $135 million investments to 280, try and double that investment in terms of family engagement. To be very, very clear, the last thing we should be doing is designing family engagement programs from Washington, but we simply want to invest in those programs at the local level that are making a difference. And be clear, this isn't to support more bake sales or more whatever. Show me what your family engagement program is doing to increase graduation rates, reduce dropout rates, increase attendance, reduce truancy and behavior issues, increase college going rates, and those are the family engagement programs we'd like to put more money behind to let them go to more schools and more communities.
We have one more question.
Thank you for coming to talk to us. I'm Robert McCoy, and I'd like to ask you a question about history, specifically what the Gates Foundation has been working on, which they refer to as big history, to try and basically turn our minds on fire. Have you come into contact with that, and if so, what do you think about it?
So curriculum is one of the things that we're not allowed to touch at the federal level. So that's always best determined at the local level by great teachers and great principals. I am aware of the work. It is interesting work, but we are never going to be in a position of pushing a curriculum or a way of studying things. And that's one we're prohibited, I think, probably for good reason by Congress from doing that.